We're about to start with the set reviews for VBT12, and we begin by putting in the Divine in Divine Lightning Radiance.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to a brand new set review series, and this time we're tackling the brand new set VBT12 Divine Lightning Radiance. And we're going to start off with one of the main poster clans of this set, which is of course none other than Angel Feathers. This set brings back the rescue check mechanic that we had introduced to us in the G series with Gavrail, but it gets a new unique modern twist, or should I say standard twist. But on top of that, we also see the return of the Nociel or Nociel archetype, which is this set's budget archetype, and it is looking pretty interesting. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into these cards and see what Angel Feather has to offer in VBT12 Divine Lightning Radiance. And of course, we're going to start off with the reprints and the triggers, and Angel Feather this time around got 2 critical reprints, and both of them are just going to be 1 stars as they're just generic reprints. Then on top of that, they also got a new heal trigger, which is Stanching Angel, and this is again a 1 star as they already got a heal trigger in the clan. Now on top of that, they also got a new draw trigger, which is Surgery Angel, and this is going to be a 3 star as this is a new draw trigger they can add to their draw trigger lineup. And of course, like any other clan, they also going to get the Sentinel criticals, and this time that is Black Spark Munkar, and Munkar is going to be a 5 star just like all the other Sentinel criticals, as it opens up deck building options in their Sentinel lineups as well as their critical and trigger lineup as well. Now this set also brings a new starter, and this time that is Magical Kid Angel, and this is going to be a 1 star as it's just a generic starter that doesn't bring anything new to the table. And the new vanilla that they got in this set is a 12k grade 2 variant, which is Clean Shake Angel, and just like most vanillas, it's just going to be a 1 star as the clan cannot really capitalize on this vanilla at all. Now before we go into the big main support, let's dive into some of the generic support, and one of those cards is this grade 1 Disinfect Angel, and her ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost put a unit card from your hand into the damage zone and put a face-up card from your damage zone into your hand. So this card allows you to access your damage zone and basically swap 1 card from your hand with 1 card in the damage zone. I'm not really fond of this card, and I'll only give it 2 stars, and the reason for that is that this card doesn't give you the count charge like most other of these damage swappers, as you're forced to swap a face-up damage. So if you counterblast a specific card that you need, you cannot search it out with this grade 1, meaning it's kind of limited like most other cards, but it can be still used as one of those generic damage swappers as it's pretty easy to use and it doesn't force you to counterblast beforehand like some other damage swappers. Now another card that allows you to interact with the damage zone is this grade 1 Stanching Angel, and her abilities are Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, cast discard a card from your hand and draw a card. Very simple, a cycle effect, we've seen this time and time again. Now her second ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, if your drop zone has a normal unit, which you can get via her Vanguard skill, cost, put a face-up grade 2 or less card from your damage zone into your soul, choose a normal unit from your drop zone and put it into your damage zone. So this card can basically fix your damage zone as well as your soul, as if there's a card in your drop zone that you rather want in your damage zone for a particular reason, you can put it therein and you can put a card into your soul from the damage zone. Now the reason why it's a grade 2 or less is of course because of Feather Palette, so you cannot really cheat out those skills, but this is actually a really good grade 1 because for one, it generates soul and it can fix your damage zone to some extent. And the reason why I think that's really good is because most grade 1s in Angel Feathers that can generate some resources, aka soul, while at the same time maybe fix your damage zone, usually cost you a card from hand that you need to discard them or they are gone from the field. That's not the case with this grid 1. This grid 1 will stay on the board so you can actively use it as a offensive tool, as a booster, or maybe as an attacker in the early game. So it's rather really useful in different kinds of scenarios. But with the upcoming Nociel deck or Nociel deck, this is even better because you want to have specific cards in your damage zone, so this card can help you to fulfill those requirements. And if Angel Feather ever goes to another playstyle that forces you or requires you to have specific cards in the damage zone, this is a great card that allows you to fetch those cards even from the drop zone back into the damage zone. As in some cases, you could say, why not rely on the grade 2 Rakiel that can just appear call those units from the drop zone? Well, for one instance, that card costs a counterblast, and for the second one, maybe some decks don't want them onto the field, but actually into the damage zone. So for that, I think this is a solid 3-star card, as it opens up more options, and it can also be just a generic resource and consistency engine in whatever Angel Feather deck you might play. Now, another grade 2 that somewhat works similar into some extent, but also has different applications, is this grade 2 Nurse of Hold Heart. And her abilities are Auto Vanguard the Breakout Circle. When placed from hand, cost counter +1, swap a unit card from your hand with a card from your damage zone. If you put a grade 0 into your damage zone, choose up to one of your opponent's rear guards, put it into the damage zone, and if you put an opponent's rear guard into the damage zone, your opponent chooses a card from his or her damage zone and heals it. Put the swap card face up. So to basically summarize what this card can do, it allows you to swap a card from your hand with a card in your damage zone, and if you specifically put a trigger unit or a grade 0 into the damage zone, then you can put one of your opponent's rear guards into the damage zone, but they of course can heal 1 damage, otherwise you're shooting them for free damage. This is basically the same interaction that we've seen with Malk of Malek as well as Ergodil in the previous Angel Feather support. Now this is pretty interesting because cost effective wise, it doesn't cost you anything, because you can immediately refund the counterblast. And you don't necessarily have to place a grade 0 into the damage zone, so you can basically use it as a generic card swapper with the added potential of also sniping one of your opponent's units, but it will also give him the counter charge while you're doing that. So in generic sense, I would say this is a decent 2-star card, but because of the Nociel or Nociel interaction, it's going to be a 3-star, and the reason why that's the case is because the Nociel engine wants a specific grade 0 into the damage zone. This card does that while also acquiring that field control aspect on top of that, which gives the archetype or the deck a bit more flexibility. So because of those interactions, I think it's still a pretty decent 3-star card. And in premium, this might actually be better, as in some cases you might want to have a specific grade 0 or a trigger unit into the damage zone. Now a grade 3 that can manipulate the damage zone is this grade 3 Buster Surgeon Asfeel. And Asfeel has the ability Auto Vanguard the Breakout Circle. When placed from hand, cost counterblast free, heal 3 cards from the damage zone, choose 3 cards from the drop zone, and put them into your damage zone, put them face up. So basically, put 3 cards from the damage zone back into the drop zone, and put 3 cards from the drop zone back into the damage zone. They're all face up, so if you can pay the free counterblast, you refund them immediately. So what's nice about this card is that it can immediately set up your damage zone if you need a specific setup for a deck. Like I explained, with Nociel, this can be really good, as you can immediately fix your entire damage zone almost instantaneously. But maybe if we get a different archetype that revolves around specific cards in the damage zone, or we get a playstyle ever in the future that does something when you heal your cards, or when specific cards are getting healed, then this might interact with that to a certain extent. For as what it can do right now, I can only give it 2 stars, as it can work in the Nociel engine, but it's not completely necessary, and besides that, it won't really do as much for your playstyle in whatever archetype you might place it. Now for the final generic card, we've got of course the grade 3 Searcher, which is Black Call Nakir, and her special ability to gain an additional 5k power is continuous Vanguard the Breakout Circle. During a turn, if a new card was put into any player's damage zone this turn, this unit gets power plus 5k. This is very easy to fulfill for Angel Feathers, as either we're going to manipulate our damage zone or we're going to manipulate our opponent's damage zone, so it's pretty damn easy to get this off. And of course, the second ability is the generic grade 3 Searcher, so because of all that, she's an obvious 5-star card like any other of the grade 3 Searchers. Now with that said, let's dive into this new Nociel engine that I've been talking about quite a few times with the previous support cards, as they all interact with this engine. And let's start with the grade 0, which is one of the reasons why those cards that allow us to put cards into the damage zone are much better than they might look on paper at first glance. And that card is this grade 0 Happy Bell Nociel. And its ability, his or her, I'm not gonna even bother on that one, is continuous in damage zone. During your turn, if you have a Vanguard with Nociel in its card name, all of your front row units get power plus 5k. So you want to have this card face up in the damage zone, because the moment it's face down, it loses its skill tax. So it needs to be face up, and then it gives all your front row units plus 5k power, as long as you have a Nociel Vanguard. There are 2 interesting aspects about this card. One, it only requires your Vanguard to be Nociel, so your rear guards can be anything else. So that means the engine has ways to still utilize other cards outside of the Nociel engine and still give them a power buff. But on top of that, this skill does stack for every single copy of Hamiel Nociel in your damage zone. So if you have 2, your front row gets plus 10. If you have 3, plus 15. If you have all 4, that's plus 20 on your front row, which can make your columns quite sizable. So that makes this card pretty interesting and actually quite effective, and with the already present card that we just discussed, as well as the other support cards within the Nociel engine, it's rather easy to fill your drop zone with these cards. So for that, I think it's a solid 3-star card. The only reason why it's not higher is because it still requires a Nociel Vanguard, so it isn't as splashable in other engines, so you're probably still reliant on running the entire Nociel core. Now, the second Nociel support card that we've got in this set is a Grade 2 Nociel, which is Love Machine Gun Nociel. And you might wonder what happened to the Grade 1. The Grade 1 was already released to Angel Feathers in the very first Angel Feathers support wave, because that Nociel is of course the Draw PG, which was degraded from a Grade 1 to a Grade 0. So if you have any question about that Grade 1, there's your answer. But this Grade 2 has the ability Auto Vanguard the Rigard Circle. When placed from your hand, cost Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1. Search your deck for up to 1 card with Nociel's card name, put it into your damage zone, and shuffle your deck. If you put a card into your damage zone, return a face down card from your damage zone to your hand. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So this is going to be for me a solid 4-star card. And I'm going to explain to you why that's the case. Not only can this card search out any Nociel from your deck, which is probably going to be the Grade 0, so you immediately can give your front row plus 5k power, but you can also get a face down card from your damage zone into your hand. So that Counterblast 1 is immediately negated, so the entire cost is Soul Blast 1, which gives you a specific card into your damage zone, which filters your deck, but you also go plus 1 as you can get a card from the damage zone into your hand, which can basically allow you to do all kinds of setup. And this card can also allow you to set up for other plays, because you can put a specific card or a specific Nociel into the damage zone and immediately fetch it out. Let's say, for example, you don't have the Grade 3 right target. You can target the Grade 3, get it into the damage zone, and then use one of the other Grade 1s to get that Grade 3 out of the damage zone into your hand, and voila, you've fixed your right chain, and you can immediately proceed to go to your full powers the next following turn. Now, you might think to yourself, that sounds like a 5-star card, and that would have been the case if this card isn't completely restricted to the Nociel archetype. If you could search out anything, then this card would have been bonkers. But it is a really solid card, and it's very important for the Nociel engine, but because it's restricted to the Nociel engine, I cannot give it more than 4 stars. Now, speaking of that Grade 3 interaction that I just talked about, let's go over one of the main Grade 3s of the Nociel engine, which is this Grade 3 Love Sniper Nociel. And its ability is act on Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, cost Counterblast 1, put the top card of your deck into the damage zone and return a card from your damage zone to your hand. So basically it's a +1, and because you can choose anything from your damage zone, you have some control over that +1, which is pretty nice, because if you have a non-Nociel in your damage zone, you can just fetch it out, or there's a key card that you want, you can still fetch it out. So this is a nice plus engine that you can have access to every single turn. But the main attraction of this Nociel is in its second ability, which is Auto Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle it attacked, cost Soul Blast 1 and discard 2 cards from your hand, write up to 1 card with Nociel in its card name from your hand as stand, and that unit gets drive -1 until the end of turn. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So this basically has the Riviere Superior Right effect. We can write into any Nociel, which allows us to swing twice every single turn. And because we have another Grade 3 Nociel, we have actually 2 solid targets to go into. We can either go back to a Love Sniper Nociel, but more ideally, we want to go into Holy Seraph Nociel. So with that explained, that this is a solid plus engine, as well as it enables you to Superior Right into a second Vanguard, which allows you to swing twice in the battle phase, and because it's a Protect clan, you generate Protect markers. It is, for me, it's very easy to say that this is a solid 4-star card. Once again, you could say 5-star, but because it's completely restricted to Nociel and not something generic, I don't think it's valid enough to make it a 5-star card. If it was more generic, then 100% completely agree with that. But because it is somewhat restricted, I wanted to only give it a 4-star rating. Now, let's talk about this Superior Right target, where we actually want to go into and where we're building towards to with our entire Nociel engine. As here we have our second Grade 3, which is Holy Seraph Nociel. And this was the original Stride unit, and this is probably your main finisher of the deck, as its ability is Auto Vanguard the Rigard Circle. When placed, costs Soul Blast 1. Search your deck for up to one card with no key on its card name, put it into your damage zone, and shuffle your deck. If you put a card into your damage zone, at the end of the turn, put a card from your damage zone on the bottom of your deck. So, whenever you write this thing, or you call to the Vanguard circle, you can give yourself an extra damage, so you can either keep yourself at high damage, so you could potentially heal extra, or you can prevent your opponent from healing, which can be a really nasty interaction if you time this right. But you need to keep in mind, you cannot resolve this skill if you're already at 5 damage, because that means you shoot yourself to 6 damage and you only put that card back into the deck at the end of your turn. So that means in between that point, the game will see that you're at 6 damage, so you will immediately lose the game. But this effect also synergizes really nicely with the Grade Zero, because we can search out the Grade Zero no-kill to give our attacks even more power while we're multi-attacking with our Great Freeze. But on top of this, it also synergizes with our second ability, which allows you to potentially get full power no-kill plays while you originally were at 3 damage. Because its second ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, cost Soul Blast 1. If you have 3 or more face-up cards with no kill on the card name in your damage zone, stand one of your rearguards. And if you have 5 or more face-up cards with no kill on the card names in your damage zone, stand 2 rearguards instead of 1. So this card allows you on attack to potentially restand 1 or both of your front row units. Yes, you can also stand a column, but you're most definitely going to restand your front rows, so you can have a total of 6 attacks in 1 turn. And if you could set up your damage zone with all your Grade Zero no kills, those attacks will have an increase of 10k, 15k, or 20k, so they're starting to beat for high numbers. And yes, the requirement to have 5 face-up no kills can be quite tricky, but with the fact that we can search them out, put them into the damage zone from the drop zone as well as the deck, but we can even give ourselves more damage than we actually have with this Grade 3, allows us to cheat out those no kills quite effectively and efficiently. Because as I explained, even if your opponent is keeping you at 3 damage, you can just resolve 2 Holy Seraph no kill to shoot yourself to 5 damage, and because you shoot specific damage, you can guarantee yourself to be at 5 face-up no kills at the time, because most of the deck revolves around Soul, which is probably one of its biggest weakness, as that is going to be your most restraining resources, as you need to find ways to generate more Soul than you're going to use. The Superior Right does help to some extent, but this is also the reason why that Grade 1 that allows you to put cards into the Soul is suddenly a lot better than first initially thought. So with everything in mind and what this engine provides to Angel Feathers, or what it provides to no-kill, I think this card is a solid 4-star card. It definitely, just like the other Grade 3, is a contender for a 5-star rating, but because it's so hard restricted to the no-kill engine and its condition to get those attacks is quite cumbersome. In some situations, it's not as easy as something like Luard, I would say. I think it's a 4-star and not more than that. But if things go right, this deck performs like any other 5-star deck would perform. So yeah, no kill is not something you should sleep on. This is one of the strongest budget decks we have seen so far. Now with the no kill budget deck discussed, let's dive into the main archetype of this set for Angel Feathers, which is of course Black Shiver Gavrail. And Gavrail has 2 abilities, and her first ability is Continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, if a total of 3 or more cards were put into any player's damage zone this turn, all of your front row units get power plus 10k. So if in total of 3 cards were swapped, then your front row gets 10k power, so your Vanguard becomes 22, your 9ks become 19k, and it's basically a little bit of power buff. It's nice, but it's not amazing. The main value of Gavrail will come in her second ability, which is Act on Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, cost Counter plus 1 and Soul Blast 1. Return a card from your damage zone to your hand. Put a card from your damage zone on the bottom of your deck and deal this unit 2 damage. Perform a damage check for each damage. So this is effectively Rescue 2. So Gavrail, every single turn, will have 4 drive checks. That is where the main pressure comes out of Gavrail, those extra Rescue drive checks. But as an added bonus on top of that, because we're already swapping 2 damage from our damage zone, we only need to swap 1 more card, or we need to deal our opponent 1 damage, and we immediately get the extra 10k power to the front row. But also, the inherent nature of this skill changes its cost from Counter plus 1 and Soul plus 1 to effectively counter charge 1 and Soul Blast 1, because we remove 2 face down damage, and 1 goes to our hands, which is also a +1, and 1 goes to the bottom of the deck, which could be triggers, so we can stack our deck with more triggers if multiple triggers hit the damage zone, and it can happen with all these rescue checks. But we can also get them into our hand if we need shield value, which is pretty interesting because it opens up options for Gavrail. Do we want to be more aggressive by getting all those offensive cards in our hand, or do we want to be a bit more defensive by getting those criticals into our hand? There are options you can choose and match via which one goes to your hand and which card goes to the bottom of the deck. So what we have on our hands right here is a Vanguard that effectively use 1 soul to give us 1 counter charge, 4 drive checks, and put a card to the bottom of the deck from the damage zone. And it can potentially give our front row an extra 10k power passively. So if we ever would get multi-attack to some extent in Angel Feathers, then this power buff would be given to all those attackers that make their way onto the front row circles. So this card in itself doesn't really look very flashy. It's very obvious where the value lies and what we get, but there aren't really inherent combos we can do. But let's take a look at the support cast around Gavrail to have a better understanding what this deck can do and where its value lies before we're going to analyze Gavrail any further and give her an official rating. First, let's talk about a generic support card within the Gavrail engine, which is this Grid 1 Black Leash Up Deal. And her ability is continuous Rigor Circle. During a turn, if a new card was put into your damage zone this turn, this unit gets power plus 10k. This is generic support. It can be used for any deck, but I'm putting it right here in the video because it has the name Black. And this new Gavrail archetype is basically the Black archetype, as some cards require our Vanguard to have Black in its name, and we can write this so we have the Black condition on our very first turn, which synergizes with another card. But overall, I think this is for me a 2-star card because it's just generic power, it's a 70k attacker. It's quite annoying that it's in 7k, but the way that we can acquire this 10k power is pretty easy, so it can be a nice beater or a booster behind our attacks at all times, especially in Gavrail, since we can rescue check every single turn. Now, the Grade 1 that I was referring to that requires a Black Vanguard is this Grade 1 Black Closure Zovil, and her abilities are Auto Vanguard Circle. When its attack hits, draw a card. So, a direct plus, which is nice, but nothing special. Then her second ability is Auto Rigor Circle. When placed, if you have a Vanguard with Black in its card name, discard a card from your hand, return a card from a damage zone to your hand, and if you returned, deal 1 damage to your Vanguard. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So effectively, if we write into that other Grade 1, or we write into a second copy of Zovil, and we call another Zovil to the field, we could effectively get an extra drive check or a rescue check on our Vanguard, which gives us a lot of pressure on our very first turn. But that is not the real use of this card. The real use of this card is that it's a rescue check on demand. When we call this thing and we play the Gavrail archetype, we can get this rescue check. But because the card is a discard, means it's actually a counter charger in disguise. Because we discard a card, we rescue check, but that card goes into hand, so it's effectively a cycle from the damage zone where we have control over which card we're going to get. So that's actually a pretty good cycle. But then we get a new damage into the damage zone, which is face up, so it's basically counter charger. But because it's a rescue check, means it also is a drive check, which can give us criticals and extra powers, maybe draws or extra heals on top of that, which is a really good value. With Gavrail costing a counterblast up front, and with other cards within the engine requiring a lot of counterblast, having a card that can start this engine without wasting counterblast or needing to pay counterblast up front is really good against opponents that are damage denying us. So for that, I think this is a solid 4-star card. This would 100% have been a 5-star card if it wasn't restricted to the Gavrail archetype or the Black archetype. So that's the reason why it's a 4-star for me. Now, when we dive into the Grade 2 territory, the first one that we see is this Grade 2 Black Mapping Salafil, and her abilities are continuous Rigor Circle. During a turn, if a new card was put into your damage zone, this turn, this unit gets power plus 10k. This is pretty easy, 19k attacker at all times, especially if we combine her with her second ability, which is Auto Vanguard Rigor Circle. When placed, cost Soul Blast 1 and heal a card from a damage zone. If you healed, deal 1 damage to your Vanguard. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. Perform a damage check. So, just like the Grade 1, this card can allow us to get a counter charge, aka the rescue check, for not wasting counterblast, because we can use Soul. So if all our damage is face down, we can use this card, Soul Blast 1, heal damage. This card won't go to her hand or doesn't go to the field, but we do get a new damage face up, which is really good. And it gets an extra 10k power because of her second ability if she's on the Rigger Circle, so she becomes a 19k attacker in the early game, with the added potential of getting a trigger on that rescue check could effectively be a really good early aggression turn. But what's really amazing about this card is that it's generic. It doesn't require a specific Vanguard name or a specific unit onto the field. So for that, this is a solid 5-star card, because this gives us extra rescue checks or drive checks in any deck. It's a solid 19k beater, but it's also a countercharger in disguise, which is really good in my opinion. So that's why it's an obvious 5-star card for any Angel Feather deck out there. Now, another grade 2 that's almost similar to this card is this grade 2 Black Aquarius Jaquil, and her ability is Auto Vanguard the Rigger Circle. When placed, costs counter +1, and this unit gets power +3k until the end of turn. Return a card from your damage zone to your hand, and if you return a card, deal 1 damage to your Vanguard. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So this is once again a rescue check on a grade 2, and it's generic, just like the previous one. So this can be used in any deck. Now this is a little bit weaker because he's a 12k instead of a 19k, but it still hits magic numbers, so it's fine. But what's different about her is that she isn't a counter charger, as she needs to pay a counter blast and we get the damage, so it's net 0. But what's great about this card over the other card is that the rescued card goes towards our hand. So effectively we go +1, but we go +1 as a selective because we can choose whatever cards within our damage zone to add to our hand. So is our right target there, or is the grade 3 searcher in there, or is a specific combo piece in there? We can just fetch it out with this grade 2. And because once again it's super generic, we can play this grade 2 in any deck. So because of that fact, it's once again for me a solid 5-star card. It's different than the previous one, but they both fill their own roles in specific scenarios, and both of them are excellent supporting cards for Gavrail. Now the final supporting card for Gavrail is a brand new grade 3 finisher, and that is Black Observe Hamiel. And Hamiel has the abilities Auto Vanguard the Rigger Circle. When placed, if you have a Vanguard with black in its card name, cost counter +1, call a card from your damage zone to the Vanguard Circle and deal 1 damage to your Vanguard. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. Perform a damage check. So this is once again a rescue check that goes break even on its resource, but instead of getting the card to your hand or it just heals outright, it puts the card onto the field. So it's a bit more aggressive, but the trade-off is that you cannot utilize when placed from hand effects like the grade 3 Searcher. Now, her main use lies in her second ability, which is Auto Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, costs Counterblast free until the end of the battle. This unit gets power +15k, critical +1, and your opponent cannot call sentinels from his or her hand to the Guardian Circle. At the end of the battle, put this unit into your soul. So this effectively becomes a 27k attacker that swings for double critical, and it has the Sentinel Guard restrict. If we put the 17k booster behind it, it's quite big, and with all the extra damage checks that we do, we can have a high chance of hitting extra triggers and stacking it all on this unit, and basically it is our win condition. Now, it costing free counterblast might be quite excessive, but as we've seen with all the rescue checks, we can countercharge quite effectively, as every single rescue check is effectively a countercharger. And we have the grade 2 and the grade 1 that can basically start that engine while having no damage face up. So there are ways that even if our opponent is damage denying us, we can get access to this card. That said, we need to have free damage to begin with. So if our opponent doesn't give us that further damage, it can be quite annoying to even do something. But interesting enough, because this card also goes towards the soul, it gives us a soul that we might use for other rescue checkers, but it's a grade 3. So this could somewhat also synergize with Hospital, because this is effectively a hospital that we can use on our very first grade 3 turn. But at the same time, it then fuels our other hospitals, so we could potentially go into a hospital the second turn if we can rewrite our Gavrail. So there's actually a lot of potential, but we can also maybe combine it with a second Hamiel, so we can put a second copy Hamiel the following turn into the soul, and then use in hospital on that same turn. So we have 2 powerful grade 3 beaters that come with the Sentinel Restrict. So with the pressure this card provides and the built-in rescue check it also gives to the engine, I think it's a solid 4-star card because it gives Gavrail access to another rescue check, so potential extra trigger, and it is a really solid finisher for the deck that on first glance might look awkward, but it's actually really good for what it does for the Gavrail deck. Now, with everything discussed, we can go back to Gavrail and understand what this deck gives Angel Feathers. Now, we have Gavrail that can give us 2 rescue checks every single turn. Now, we also have 2 grade 2s that can give us a rescue check. We have the grade 3 that can give us a rescue check, and we have the grade 1 that also can give us a rescue check. So, if we combine that, we can easily look at maybe 6 or 7 drive checks or trigger checks a turn, which is pretty insane because 6 or 7 drive checks or trigger checks increase the chance of hitting triggers pretty significantly. And the fact that Gavrail can potentially shove triggers back into the deck is pretty good because it also increases the consistency of hitting triggers next turn. You might think to yourself, how are we supposed to get those triggers because they're at the bottom of the deck? We can shuffle the deck with the grade 3 searcher, of course. Now, the main idea of this deck is to get those triggers, stack it on Hamiel, and use Hamiel as a finisher with a big power column that comes with the Sentinel Restrict and multiple crits. That might not always be as successful as that requires quite a lot of things to go right because you also rely on triggers, so there is a level of RNG. But the fact that we just out pressure upon with the fact that we doing so many damage checks and trigger checks that it's pretty ridiculous that the chance of getting triggers is high enough that it somewhat outcompete the RNG nature of what this deck inherently is. And because we have the grade 2s and the grade 1s that can get a quite significant power buff, even without that finisher, the deck can still push for damage every single turn. And if we hit 1 or 2 criticals, then we can still stack that up onto our units. So with it all in mind, I think Gavrail is what it provides as a boss unit and the engine around it. I think it's a solid 4-star card. It's not good enough to get a 5-star card in my opinion because it still relies just on random luck as you rely on triggers doing the work for you, and it doesn't really do anything besides generating high enough columns with potential critical pressure. This is what we've seen for Angel Feathers for a long time, and this is not really anything new. So I'm quite hesitant to see if this is actually that much better than the clan already could provide. But it's still a powerhouse if things go the right direction, and the overall engine pieces that this set provides to Angel Feathers can last longer than probably Gavrail herself, which might sound as a terrible thing, but for the longevity of the clan, this is actually a really good sign. And with that said, we've seen all the new cards for Angel Feathers within this set. We've seen a lot of interesting stuff. The main bulk has of course been about the rescue checks for Gavrail as well as for the generic sets, which could be incredibly powerful in whatever deck you might play. But we also got a new interesting engine around Nociel, which for some might actually be more interesting than Gavrail and potentially more powerful, because to some extent it could be a little bit more consistent as you're not relying on triggers to go correctly as you just setting up an engine, but that engine does require quite a lot of pieces, so it's still tricky if it's good or not depending on what the scenario is. That said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards for Angel Feathers. Do you think that Gavrail's actually really powerful and I undervalued the card in this particular set review, or do you think that the ratings that I gave in this video were quite on the nose? And of course, what is your opinion about the new budget build for Nociel? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, as this set provides a lot of interesting things for not only Angel Feathers, but also for the other clans in this set. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!